I crept into a little crack, and me and Rabbi Sternberg had a series of conversations today about Tanya. And it's just hysterical to see how differently we learned the Tanya. And then as we argue, we realize that we don't really disagree. It's the way he put it to me was, whichever Maimon you learn first tells you how to think, and then all of them follow that pattern, and sometimes you miss things. If I'm wrong, I'm terribly wrong. I'm not terribly wrong about one shtickle, but the whole arichis. I don't think I'm wrong. I really don't think I'm wrong. But the akshonis that we have in this learning is that in the shita that is esesfiris and eir, and that is esesfiris and eir lifnei atzimtzum, the esesfiris that are lifnei atzimtzum are not integrated. They're not working together. They're just 10. 10 oiros. That's why he uses the word des advas ves achtos. He doesn't really use the word discalulus. His advas visactus. And I explained to you that his advas, ta'aruvis, is a word which is frequently used for the mixing together in a disorderly way, in a klipa way. The real concept of discalulus, Shnei Zalman, is in kelim. You can only have discalulus after you have separation. When you divide something up, you put it into kelim, you can bring them back together. The deep concept of chassidus, which is called tikkun and iskalulus, is in kelim. It's not really in oiris. It's not really in oiris. Let's start with a question. Okay, I told you I was giving you a shir on Chav Daled. I don't know if I'm doing Chav Daled. I'm certainly going back to the end of Chav Gimel. But I want to start with a question, okay? It says in my Morim, I saw this twice. I saw it in V'yadayta Moskva, Reish Zayin, and I also saw it in Tzadik Daled, and I mentioned it last week in the class. It is a klal gadol in Chassidus, that kol gili legabi azul so helam ha'atzmi kol gili ha'atzmi helam legabi azul. If I reveal to you, it's not the whole truth. If I'm revealing the whole truth, you can't have it. In other words, there's a presumption. There's a philosophically logical presumption. Every revelation is a diminution. Every gili is simsim. When something is on a level of less gilui, it's more concentrated. It's deeper. When something is on a level of being more brought down, it's less concentrated, and therefore it's dilute. It's less. It's a cardinal law of logic that Gilui equals Tzimtzum. Now, what's the simplest reason Gilui equals Tzimtzum? What's the simplest reason Gilui equals Tzimtzum? The answer to that question is because Gilui means to a makabel. Gilui means to a makabel. When you're giving, a teacher is teaching a student, and the student is understanding, the criteria of Gili is not the teacher teaching, the criteria of Gili is the student understanding. The student has a lesser mind than the teacher does, so Gili is Tzimtzum. It's a logical thing. Anytime you reveal to another, there's Gili. And this truth applies to everything. It applies to everything. Seichel, mides, anytime you express something which is on the inside, to the outside, especially if you're expressing it to somebody else, it's less than the way you have it, right? What about eating safe? When eating, could you put the air conditioner on? You don't do the air conditioner. You don't do it? I'm sorry to be matriach you. Eating safe. When eating safe is revealed, it's less ain't safe. I mean, same thing I said last week. Eating safe is more revealed. It's 2 weeks ago, actually. We had Shavuos in the middle, yeah? If eating safe is revealed, it's less ain't safe, yes or no? And of course, my next question is going to be, if it's less ain't safe, then it's not ain't safe. And if it's ain't safe, it can't be less. How do you work that out? How do you work that out? How is it true that when something is revealed, it's automatically less than when something is hidden, if the entity that you're starting with is Ein Sof and the entity that you're finishing with is Ein Sof?
Yeah.
So any thoughts on the subject?
Level. You explained by the midas that within each midah they have each midah, and within that aspect's Ein Sof, but each midah is its own midah. But for each of them, they have an Ein Sof aspect to it. So I guess it's a different aspect of Ein Sof, which is playing out if it's more mugdar.
I don't know what I explained. I don't know what I remember what I said. Avos, Menachem Mendel? Huh? The beginners don't bother me. You understand what I'm asking? And I'm going to compound the question.
Where is Ein Sof more revealed though? Above or below? I mean, higher or lower?
And the higher level, where the Ein Sof is less revealed, it's more.
But
It's deeper.
if it's higher, then the Ein Sof should be more, meaning, it's like when you go higher, is Ein Sof more revealed or less revealed? Because if it's...
There's more of Ein Sof, but it's less revealed. It's like teaching in a higher class. You teach more information, it takes less time. Why? You use fewer words. Use fewer words to communicate more. So you gave more, but you gave it without bringing it down so much. So you're right. On a higher level, there's more lakus, but there's less gilui. Because gilui means it has to come lower to reach a lower student.
So in like the most Gashmis level, in the lowest level, there's the most Ein Sof? Like...
The most gilui.
Oh, Ein Sof?
And if it's the most gilui, it means it's the most diminished. What I'm really asking
It's
is...
not Megillah. It's not Megillah, the lower. I mean, Sof is not Megillah.
If it's Ein Sof,
Ein Sof is not Megillah, correct, right? But
Lower-
Atzilus Ein Sof is Megillah.
So it goes like, it's like middle, and then, so meaning highest is not, then the lower, middle it's the most revealed, and then lowest it's the least revealed.
After
Makes sense.
Atzilus, there's no gilui of Ein Sof.
Right. So we're talking about, so still is the lowest, the most Gillah is.
Yeah, but the question is, how is the gilui different from a higher level to a lower level, and yet they're all Ein Sof? It's a funny concept to understand. And the question is especially funny when there's no Caleb. When you're talking about oil by itself. Talking about oil by itself, right? Oil on a higher level is hidden. Oil on a lower level is revealed. You're talking about oil not because of Caleb, just oil. Or in the language of our Maimon, yeah? Lifnei HaTzimtzum, the oil is included. After the Tzimtzum, the oil is revealed. It's not about Caleb. The very fact that after the Tzimtzum, the oil is revealed, so one of the words that he uses very emphatically on top of page Memtes is the word Mitzias, second line from the top of the page. Mitzias, Dover, third line of the page, right there. Mitzias, exact same words. That's the beginning is Mitzias, Dover. The same oil before the Tzimtzum was not a Mitzias, after the oil is a Mitzias. What's the Mitzias of oil? Gilui. He doesn't say that, but I'm telling you that. So how does Gilui change oil? How does Gilui change oil? Again, if you would say that the answer is Zulas, I get that.
And something else is changing it.
That in order for something else to get it, it has to change to that something else. That's a Tzimtzum.
So,
But even then you would ask the question, if you're talking about things which are limited, so this person gets so much, this person gets so much based on their level, you have to reduce it more, reduce it less. And the irony is, the less you're giving, the more you're revealing. Meaning, when you're giving to a lower level, you have to say it in more words, you have to reveal it more, but it's less. And they're interdependent. Since I'm bringing it to a lower level, on the one hand I'm bringing it down, on the other hand I'm diminishing it. In a higher grade, I'm revealing it in a more concentrated way, I'm diminishing it less. So less is more and more is less. It's exactly that. That's the taich. Gila legabe azulas is helam ha'atzmi. Gila ha'atzmi helam legabe azulas. The closer something is to what it is by itself, the less revealed it is, but the more you're giving. The further something is away from the way it is by itself, the more you're revealing it and the less you're giving. They're interdependent. But that works when you have a zulas. There's a makabel. When you're talking about oil, Lifnei HaTzimtzum, the oil is in one state. After it's the oil is in a different state. Why is the oil less by the virtue of the fact that it's gilui? Why is the oil less by the virtue of the fact that the Eid is Metzias.
And the whole symptom and doesn't make sense.
It's
no?
a very hard thing to understand.
But how does symptom and that based on even Kalim wouldn't work so well because what's symptom and safe? If it's safe, how can you symptom and safe? That's not safe from symptom.
Because it's in a different place.
Meaning said Kalim would work a little better, but it doesn't really. Or Azulas would work better. How do you symptom and safe?
That's his question.
The question is how
Same.
his on or itself.
It's the same thing.
Once you answer one, go to the other. Not the other way around. Once you answer it, doesn't go for both.
Nobody has anything to say. I don't know what to say.
If it's in a different area. Because it's not going into something else. Could that be because now it's in a different area, it's representing it. Almost as if it's like part of itself, not it's representing it.
Is there another that's receiving it, or is there not another that's
You
receiving
don't
it?
have to have a receiver.
But the different area means a receiver. That's what the meaning of the words is. What does it mean, a different area?
It's possible that the answer stays the same and just like the level changes it, not like Haley. Not a Zulas, like the where it is. Kind of what he's saying. Exactly what you're saying. That's just not me. The answer doesn't change.
I'm saying it does.
Are we speaking about
It just
Chassidus?
becomes a
Huh?
different.
Are we speaking about Chassidus?
We're talking about Ein Seif that has Esesphilis. Both. But not both where the Esesphilis is added on to the Ein Seif. Because the Esesphilis are added on to the Ein Seif, the Esesphilis is coming from Kalim, from Azulas. But the Eibishter, because of his Ratzin, created an oil with Sphiris. So both things exist together in the kind of way that they're not making each other less. Yeah, we're talking about them. This whole Hemshire is talking about Esesphilis and oil. Esesphilis and oil. I mean, you wanted to use a more exotic term. Memale kalalmin. Memale kalalmin's oil exists before the Tzimtzum, but lives in the Tzimtzum. It's not a Matthias. It's not a Gili. After the Tzimtzum Adishin, for all kinds of reasons, the Memale kalam becomes a Matthias. It becomes Gili. Even before it goes into Kalim. So automatically, if the oil becomes Begili, automatically it's less than it was before. Why? And how? And how?
Kavana. Actually works.
Kavan explains why it happens, but not what's happening. Let's leave the question on the table. Let's learn. Let's learn the end of Perek Kuf Gimel again. Repetition, but bekitzer nimres. What's the repetition? This mimer says two opposite things. Number one, in order for Esesphiris to come after the Tzimtzum, from Esesphiris to come before the Tzimtzum, there has to be a huge Tzimtzum. Because there's a very big difference between how the Esesphiris are before the Tzimtzum and the Esesphiris are after the Tzimtzum. Number two, as much as the Tzimtzum will change as Esesphiris after the Tzimtzum compared to the before the Tzimtzum, it's only a Tzimtzum of Miyat, it's not a Tzimtzum of Ischachos. I'm going to repeat again what I just said. Why? Because you know this, you need to sort of open up that door, yes? Number one, there's a huge difference between the Esesphiras that they are before the Tzimtzum and Esesphiras that they are after the Tzimtzum, and that's why you have to have a Tzimtzum to change them from the way they were in the state of Pshitas before to the way they are in the state of Metzias after. Number two, In spite of how much they're changing, it's only Gili Ahelim, it's only Miyat, it's not Shinei Mahus. This is the position of the Ayin Beis, based on our favorite friend, other than Kavona, on Mashmos and an Eitz Chaim. That's where it starts, Perek Ches, on Mashmos and an Eitz Chaim. Correct? That's what we're learning.
It's an Aryan set before, right?
Yes.
Representing that.
I don't know what your question is.
Is it being battled to that? Is it being battled to it?
Yeah. Last line on page Memches. Va'af al pi shehi mamish bechines hachokma shehoyse klula bein save baruch hu im kol asa b'segnas. Page Memches. Last line. The singling out of Chochma through Tzimtzum Arishoin, yes, is exactly the same Chochma as it was earlier. Why? Because we're going in the Shita that in spite of all the difficulties, we're calling this Tzimtzum Miyat. Even though if it happens through Chaz Aved, it's Miyat. It's the same Eir, it's being diminished, right? It's not as Chachas. Mekomokim at the same time. Ke the very fact that Chochma is coming out by itself, it's not mixed. And again, the word ta'aruv is not the word diskalus with the other spheres. That's going down from its earlier step. As the spheres agnuz of Tzimtzum are all together. They're all together not because they're cooperating, not because they're getting along, not because they're sharing ideas, but because they're in the presence of the Eibishter. There's a spheres that in the presence of the Eibishter, because they're all together, automatically there's a higher air. When they're being separated out with Tzimtzum Rishon, automatically they're a lesser air. Why?
Because you're not representing it anymore.
Parenthesis. Okay, now listen carefully to the words. Okay, listen carefully to the words. The Levad, you're not translating the Levad in a Shir. First of all, not besides, Levad, first of all. Hayerida ayedei etzem hayizgalus she'adei zinasa b'chinas Messias David. The very fact that the Sfiras HaGenuz Lifnei HaTzimtzum were not in a state of Gilui, and after the Tzimtzum Rishon they are in a state of Gilui, is a huge change. What is the label of this change? Messias David. That the Sfiras HaGenuz Lifnei HaTzimtzum were not a Messias David, and the Sfiras HaGenuz after the Tzimtzum are a Metzias Dover, Kanal Perek Chabeis, as the Rebbe explained in the previous Perek. Now you have to understand what the Rebbe is talking about over here. The Rebbe is talking about here a scenario which doesn't exist. It is on page Memvav. The scenario that doesn't exist is what would happen if all the Esesfidas before the Tzimtzum came after the Tzimtzum. Together. If all the Esesfiras that exist, Gnuzis, Lifnei HaTzimtzum, would become Begili after a Tzimtzum, but together. Yeah? What would happen? There wouldn't be Esed. There would be how the Esed is somehow one. Okay? And if the Esed would be somehow one, there would be a phenomena of Pshitus. There would be a phenomena of Pshitus. If there'd be a phenomenon of Pshitus, it would be on a higher level. But in spite of the fact that if all Esesfiras came after the Tzimtzum, but before the Tzimtzum together, they'd be in a state of Pshitus, but they would be how Pshitus is Beis Galus. And Pshitus Beis Galus is a Tzimtzum.
What does Pshitus mean here? Because we said the whole thing is because Eretz Mitzrayim is no Pshitus.
But if all Esesfiras are together, right? One of the questions that was asked in the previous Maimon was, how could all Esesfiras be together? What was his answer?
Scholars.
No.
We have Klal.
The answer is that they're in a state of Bli Gvul. And everything which is in a state of Bli Gvul is Pshitas. Bli Gvul of Chochma is not Chochma.
Oh, it is legal.
Bli Gvul of Chesed is not Chesed. It is Chesed, but it's Chesed without a Metzias. The reason all Esesfiras can be in the same place is because Esesfiras are Bli Gevul. The way the Esesfiras are Bli Gevul, they're Bli Metzias. They're Pshitos. So that Esesfiras, that we're able to be together Lifnei HaTzimtzum because they're Bli Gevul, and therefore each one is Pshitos, all together they don't contradict each other, so all the pshituses are in the same nekuda. If all of those esed oidas would come after the tzimtzum, there would be a gilia pshitus. But there would still be a tzimtzum. Why? Because they're a gilui. And there's a gilui, there's a metzias davar. Now guys, do I understand a word I'm saying? Not a word. But I'm translating the words. Look inside. The levad. Translate levad again? First of all, very good. Hayerida shadei etzem hayes galas. If the esesfiras hagenuzis together, and how could they be together lifnei hatzimtzum? How could you put chokhmah and chesed in the same space? They're a contradiction. Either they cancel each other, like malachim, or they diminish each other. What happens when you put chesed and gvura together? So one becomes dominant, one becomes secondary, right? One becomes dominant, one becomes chesed. So if chesed were mixed together, so either you have a chesed and gvura controls the chesed, or you have the gevura, and the chesed makes the gevura a little nicer. But you can't have chesed 100%, gevura 100%, and they're both in the same place. It can't be. An infinite midah is infinitely intolerant of another midah. How could they be together? So the answer that he gave on Perikut Ches, or Yutes, was that since every sphere is believable, and it's a rule, that when the spheres are in state of believable, they're automatically in a state of pshitos, meaning chesed that is believable doesn't have the character of chesed, because it's too strong for the metzias of the character of chesed. So there's no contradiction between the pshitos of mitzvah chesed and the pshitos of mitzvah gvura, the pshitos of mitzvah netzach, and the pshitos of mitzvah hayt. So lifnei tzimtzum, all the spheres are able to be together because they state of pshitos. Yeah, if that spheres emerges just as they were lifnei tzimtzum, that would be a tzimtzum. You know why? Etzem hayis gaulus nasa metzias davar. What I'm doing is translating words. I'm just translating the words. Because I don't understand. Now, ubefrat. Now comes point 2. You listening? The way it happens, b'poyel. The way it happens, b'poyel, the esesphiras do not come together. If all esesphiras came together, you would still have pshitos, but what would change would be gilui. And if it's gilui, it's metzias. It's a gilui of pshitos. Now, even a gilui of pshitos is a tzimtzum. Why? Gilui is always a diminution. Kol gilui gabezos helamat. But now we have a secondary aspect. The way the Eibishter made it, the esesphiras hagenuzis before the tzimtzum do not emerge together after the tzimtzum. They emerge one at a time. They emerge separately. You know why they emerge separately? Because one of the differences between esesphiras lifnei tzimtzum and esesphiras lachar tzimtzum, the lifnei tzimtzum, they're believable, right? And if they're believable, somebody help me. What's the next word? Pshitos. They're pshitos. And if they're believable, that's sakafist. And if they're believable, then pshitos, they can be together. But if they emerge individually, what does that mean? The Eibishter reduced the safe of chesed that it shouldn't be believable. The Eibishter reduced the safe of gvura, it shouldn't be believable. The Eibishter reduced the safe of chokhmah, the safe shouldn't be believable. And that's why each one has to come separately. If each one is coming separately, so not only you have the inyan agiloi, but you have the inyan atziyat. Look at the next line. Ubefrat keshenim shchavinis gala bifnei atzmei. Especially when they're coming achar tzimtzum, that each one is revealed by itself. He uses the exact same words he used the line before. Shenasa bebechinas metzias davar. They become a form. What is the form? What's the body of Ein Sof? Gilui. Right? What's the body of ideas? Words. What's the body of godliness? That it's somehow revealed, even if there's no zulas of such a thing as revelation. But he adds a few more words. Ve'eina bechinas pshitas. You see? If you don't put the words ve'eina bechinas pshitas on the third line, the second line and the third line are saying the same thing. On the second line it says nasa bechinas metzias davar. On the third line it says shen nasa bechinas metzias davar. My father gave a whole shit on that shin. Why in the second line it says nasa bechinas davar without a shin, and the third line says shen nasa bechinas davar. Okay, not my speed. But what the Rebbe is saying is, if all esesphiras remained in their state of pshitos, pshitos in this case equals bligavul, commission is vayal el petniketes. when the Rebbe Rashab was trying to understand how the Esespheres could be together with Nea Tzimtzum, and he said it's because they're bli gvul, there's no state of one Metzias and another, because there's Pshitas. If all of those Esespheres would emerge begilui together, there would be a Gili of Pshitas, that would also be a Tzimtzum. Why? Now they're a Metzias. What's the Metzias? Gili. But it's not the way it happens. The way it happens is every sphere comes by itself. And the fact that every sphere comes by itself is that the sphere somehow la'acharat tzimtzum are no longer believable. If they're no longer believable, they're no longer pshitas. If they're no longer pshitas, what comes the next sentence? They contradict each other. They can't be they can't be together. And each one emerges separately. If each one emerges separately, you have two truths, two aspects of tzimtzum. Aspect number one, that nimshachov and nisgal with the atmosphere become a metzias davar, and the meaning of the word metzias is that there's a gili of it. And number two, ve'ena b'chidas pshitas mamish k'moi shahoysa koyim. It's no longer in the pshitas as it was before. And the Rebbe makes a statement.
So what are the two separate? There's two separate reasons over here. Yeah.
There's two separate ideas
Of why it's going to be a Yeridah.
of how the Yeridah, how the tzimtzum would be. The Eidah letter form of tzimtzum is something that never happened. Because the Eibishter doesn't do it the way it says in the second line. If the Eibishter would reveal all the Esespheres and Genuzas after the Tzimtzum together, that means they'll be in a state of Pshitos. The only thing is they'd be in a state of Gilui.
Would it be even believable? I mean, would it be Gilui?
The word believable is very uncomfortable because the way they, in the Ayin base, for something to be called Eid and believable has to be Seviv Kalam. When you talk about Esespheres and Eid, it's literally halfway between believable and Vul, which makes no sense at all. But that's the language, right? And the term that's used to denote it is Tziyah. So it's very hard to use the word believable, okay? But if all Esespheres emerge together, there would be a Pshitos, but it would be a Gilu, which would already be a Tzimtzum. But then he says in the third line, but you know what else is? The Emes says they don't come out together. Why are they together? Because they're not pshitas. Why they're not pshitas? Because they're not bligvul of the spheres. So therefore, there's two aspects of tzimtzum and the emergence of chochem by itself. Number one, gilui, and number two, not pshitas. Not pshitas because the chochem is including bina, but because the chochem is not in a state of pshitas. When is chochem in a state of pshitas? When chochem is bligvul. If the only thing that exists is Chochmah. Chochmah in an infinite state has no Metzias of Chochmah. So when it says that the Esespheres emerge, they're not B'chinas Pshitas, it's not only because it's not together with the Bina, because it's not B'li Gavul. So the Chochmah takes on a character. So there's two aspects to the Tzimtzum of the Eidin Seif. Number one, Gilui, which is Metzias, and number two, that it's not B'chinas Pshitas. And then he says an interesting thing on the fourth line. The Heder Apshitos, the simple fact that the way the spheres emerge is not in a way of Pshitos, it shows on a diminution of light. How? A hiddenness of light. How? The inner dimension of the Eid is not revealed, Begilin reveals. The Pnimius Eid is not revealed. I need guys to understand. The language of Pnimius Eid and Chitzenius Eid is the language of the Samach Vov. It's not the language of the Ayin Beis. Because the language of the Ayin Beis is Esespheres. Is Esespheres. But he's using that language.
Is this a hiddenness or there's a
What does it all mean? And by the way, if you look in the next Pedic, he asks a kasha, which is hard to understand, and he gives two terutzim. The first teret uses the signet of Pnimius and Chitzenius, and the second teret uses the signet of Spheres. It almost sounds like the first Pedic is like the Samach Vov. In other words, if you hold this Pshitas Ha'ed, but at least there's in a Pnimius and a Chitzenius Ha'ed, if you hold that there's no thing as a Spheres in it. The whole idea of Spheres comes from Kalim. But in order for Kalim to be able to make Oyed take on a character of Kali, the Oyed has to be reduced enough to take on the character. So the Pnimius has to go away, so the Chitzenius can take on the character, but the character is not from the Eid itself, it's from the Kalim. So in the Samach Vav, you have the language of Pnimius and Chitzenius. The Rebbe is bringing it here. In the third paragraph of Perek Chav Gimel, Chav Dalet, he uses the signet of the Ayin Beis. That's a sphere. Kalim
the
Shabbat,
Kalim
as
is-
the Sfiris and Eid.
The Kalim cause the Chitzenis Ayr, or the Chitzenis?
The Kalim can only hold Chitzenius Eid. So in order for the Eid to come into the Kali, the Pneumius and the Chitzenius have to be separated.
Okay.
Talk to me.
It's over here. It's not the same as Samach. We're saying in the areas of Glib and also in the Shosher itself.
Correct. Very good. So you tell me Pshat. In other words, in Samach Vav, Pneumius and Chitzenius Eid is like Sefer Kalaman and Mamala Kalaman. Here, Pneumius and Chitzenius Eid is a Mamala Kalaman and more Mamala Kalaman. Well taken. I'm with you. But what does it mean? I'm reading the words. Yeah, the head and Apshitus, the fact that after the Tzimtzum, first of all, Chochmah is now Begilui, and before it was Gonos. Second of all, Chochmah is Begilui by itself, meaning there's no Pshitus, which really means that Chochmah is no longer in the state of Beligavul, is a second aspect of Tzimtzum. And what is the symptom of that second aspect of Tzimtzum? That the Pneumius of the Eid went away, and all that's left is the Chitzenius Eid. Frek Menachem Mendel, Pneumius Eid. This is the Pneumius of Eid Akav. This is Pneumius in Esesphiris Agnuzes. There's somehow a Pneumius and a Chitzenius, and somehow the Pneumius is going away, and the Chitzenius is being left over. How does the soul work? Yeah, everything he's saying is true. Go ahead.
When you say the Esesphiris are legal before the Tzimtzum, are they legal by themselves, or are they legal because it's now?
I'm going to answer you, but you can't ask me any questions. Because this is not this subject, it's Perikites. The answer is by themselves. Then he says, Oidzais, fifth line. Everything we just read is the first point. Okay? And I want to remind you, I want you to listen to the Rebbe Rashab's language. The Chochmah after the Tzimtzum is exactly the same as Chochmah. It's not Tzimtzum, it's not Yesh Maya, it's only Gil Yelam. But it's Tzimtzum. Number one, it's Tzimtzum. Why? Because it comes by itself. And he splits the coming by itself into two parts. Number one, what would happen if all Esesphiros would be revealed together? So you would have Pshitus, but you would have Mitzias because of Gilui. But Lepoil, they don't come together, they come each one separately. So in addition to the fact that you have Mitzias, which is Gilui, you have Heder Apshitus. And if you've Heder Apshitus, that means the Pneumius Ha'ed has gone away, and the Chitzenius Ha'ed is what's left, and as Menachem Mendel correctly pointed out, Pneumius Ha'ed over here doesn't mean Al Derech Mashal Igul. It's the Pneumius of Mamalakalam. It's the Pneumius of Esesphiris. But this is what the Rebbe says. And then he says, Oid Zois is the second idea. Look at the second idea, okay? Shenis Alim Ha'oid, Shahoyer Meir Behem, Ki Shahoyer Mesachtim Yachad. There is an Oid which automatically happens when you put Esesphiris together.
But they're still Masachtim when they come down.
No, they're separate, Peter.
I thought we're saying if they were to come out together, still it would be a problem. That's what you're saying.
Still will be a Tzimtzum.
Right, now.
And then he said on the third line, but they don't come out together, they come out separate.
Okay. There's not two reasons if they were to come together.
So because they're not coming out together, number one, you're losing what's called Pneumius Ha'ed. And number two, you're losing the oil which is available when they're in a state of Achdus. Now, what's the
Coming out
difference?
together,
Okay,
sorry.
read the top of page Memvov. I mean, we talked about it. It's in the Maimed. No, I want you to understand what I'm doing. I'm translating the Rebbe's words. Havana. Where's the Havana? Now it's 9:31. We're not even a minyan. We could stop the shir, we could continue the shir. It's your choice. You're free to go. This is a guilt trip.
I'm gonna stay either way, but
You're going to stay either way? Okay, so stay. I'm going to continue. Okay, we'll have to figure my out. I'm going to continue.
Could we
Is
go
that
lunch
okay?
tomorrow? Could we start at like at 15 tomorrow?
You have to understand, I have to be prepared. Now I'm asking you a question. I learned this 5 times, so what took me 40 minutes to prepare? The preparation I remember, I don't know what to say. I don't know what to tell you. I don't know what to tell you. I don't know what to tell you. What I just did was I translated the words. I think I translated them correctly, which is already a big deal. Just push it, touch the Rebbe. What is the Rebbe saying? What's the difference between the word Nasa B'chinas Metzias David on the second line and Nasa B'chinas David on the third line? I'm explaining the difference. The difference is that on the second line, they're all emerging together, so it's pshitos, but it's gilui. On the third line, they're not emerging together, so not only it's gilui, but it's also not pshitos. But then he adds on the fourth line, and then he adds on the fifth line, which I don't even begin to understand how that's a separate idea, that nish'alim ha'oish ha'yameir behem kishayu misachtem yachad. So who's staying here? I'm not holding you. I'll talk to one person. I don't mind. I'm gonna talk about this. Do I know that what I'm gonna say is emes? Do I know what I'm gonna say is emes? I have no idea. But I'm gonna give you something to think about. I'll give you something to think about. Okay? So everybody should know that I will not be insulted in any way, shape, or form. If you want to be a normal person and leave, it's already 9:33. And I'll talk to one person. If you're all going to walk out, I'm not going to talk to the camera. But if one person will sit here, I'm going to share this with you.
I'll watch it later.
Okay. If you want to leave now.
It's good on
Mach schnell, gegangen. Let's go. Okay. Head. What is the mashal for Ein Seif? It's a stupid question because there's many mashal for Ein Seif, right? The right answer right now is the word tainug. The mashal for Ein Seif is tainug. Let's speak now balabatish. Let's speak in very, very goyim dekaesias. Why is the mashal for Ein Seif tainug? Why is the mashal of Ein Seif tainug? We're going to go weiter.
How long do you think this is going to take?
At least a half an hour.
Oh.
Why is the mashal of Ein Seif tainug? Why? Go. Come on. Because tainug is the beligul of the nefesh. If you learn Ramban from the Friedrich Rebbe, there's three madregas. There's Gilead nefesh, there's koyach nefesh, and there's the levush nefesh. Gilead nefesh means when the whole nefesh comes out. Koyach nefesh means when the nefesh comes out through a funnel, through one tool. But in the Nat you have the lashon. Afapisha einam atzmim mikomo koim hareim nafshim. The koyachas are in between. They're not reflecting the whole pshitas of the nefesh, but they're close enough to the pshitas of the nefesh to be nefesh-like. Get out. And the lowest madrega is levush. What's levush? Machshav oisius. The nefesh has to use garments to express itself. Oisius are considered chutz nefesh.
How's that different than
koyach? Koyach is an aspect of the nefesh that's expressing the nefesh, but in the kind of way where what the nefesh is comes out. Levushim is the nefesh being expressed through oisius that hide the nefesh. In order to say what the nefesh is, they have to unnefesh it. 3 levels. Giluyim, koiches, levush. Giluyim means the whole neshama is coming out. Koiches means the neshama is coming out, but it's speaking through a funnel. In order for me to talk to you, I can't speak yechida. I can't speak yechida'ese. There's no conversation. My yechida is mine, your yechida is yours. Either we agree or we don't agree at all. There's no way to meet. But if I can take my yechida and put him into oisius and seichel, we can talk logically. I can explain it to you, you explain it to me. So even though my seichel is affecting my nefesh, but it's reduced enough that I can share it with you and you can evaluate it. You can share it with me and I can evaluate it. And maybe we can agree. Okay? So, Gilead Nefesh means the bligvo, the Nefesh is coming out. And there's 2 Machon of Gilead Nefesh, Chassidus. Ratzon and Tainug. The Mashal of Ratzon you know, you understand. The Mashal of Ratzon is powerful. Willpower is infinite. Willpower is whatever you are, you want, and it's impossible to explain it, impossible to limit it. The Machon Ratzon expresses the power of the neshama. The power of the neshama comes out in Ratzon. Okay, but why is Tainuk believable? Why is Tainuk considered a Gilei HaNefesh? And the answer is because Tainuk expresses the richness of the nefesh. The Reichkeit of the neshama exists in Tainuk. The richness of your neshama exists in Tainuk. It's quiet, it's deep, but it's rich. So what is Tainuk? What is Tainuk? What is Tainuk? You eat food. Okay, you ate food. And you felt good. Now that feeling good from eating food is either a good thing or a bad thing, but that's the fact. You ate food, you felt good, right? So what happens to a person who ate food and felt good? Is he going to eat some more? It feels good. The disease comes in when you feel bad about the fact that you ate. So in order to make yourself feel better, because you feel bad that you ate, you eat more, right? That's when it becomes an illness. So why, when you eat food, do you feel good? Why? When you listen to music, you feel good. When you look at pictures, you feel good. Now, not everybody feels good from the same things. One person likes this food, one person likes this food, one person couldn't care less for food, one person likes music, another person likes something else. But every person has things that give him pleasure. Why? Why? So the reason one person gets pleasure from one thing, another person gets pleasure from another thing, is because we have different personalities. In other words, our etzem has a stamp. The very essence of a human being is not like God. The very essence of a human being has a character. But that character is not a logical character. It's an absolute character. It's your essence. Your essence is disposed. Your essence is inclined. Your essence has a chush. And this, and not this, and this. This is going to give you pleasure. This is going to be boring to you. This is going to be upsetting to you. And the other person's forget. Every person has a personality. And this is true. Side the nefesh alakis and side the nefesh abahamis. Komuvim v'gam pashut. Okay, and in each nefesh, whatever it is that your character is, when it comes out, it gives you pleasure. So what's the lumdus? What is the lumdus? The lumdus is as follows. The neshama is bli gvul. But in addition to the neshama being bli gvul, the neshama is pshitas. In your neshama there's everything. Every idea, every feeling, every sense, every whatever. Every experience that a human being can have in your neshama exists. But it doesn't exist as individual experiences. It doesn't exist as individual ideas. It doesn't exist as individual feelings. It doesn't exist as individual sensual experiences. It exists as part of the plainness and the transcendence of the neshama. You follow that logic? Inside your neshama, everything is, but everything is in a state of oneness. Yeah? Now you're down in the world. In the world, you have nothing. You're chaser, right? It's not ein chaser pale. Ein chaser pale is true in the Lakus. In Ivrai, we're chaser. I have a brain, I know no information. I have a heart, I have no feelings. I have senses, and I'm not sensitized, not to seeing, not to hearing, not to smelling. Why? My neshama has all of those things. So if my neshama has all of those things, why don't I have them? Because my neshama has them in a state of bli gvul. My neshama has them in a state of bli gvul. Because my neshama has them in a state of bli gvul, I don't have them, because I can only have them one at a time. My body says you can have this idea, this feeling, you can only use your brain for one thought at a time, whatever the particular limitations are. But my nefesh has everything, and I have nothing, and I want. Ich will. You follow what I'm saying? So the Eibishter built an interesting system. Everything you want, you gotta go get. Everything you want, you gotta go get. You want food, you have to work for it. You want to listen to music, you have to create it, find somebody else to create it. Whatever the particulars are, every chesaron, in order to satisfy it, you have to go and get it. But those chesaronis that you go and get, that are consistent with your personality, the way the Eibishter made you, you're disposed towards them. When you will get them, you're going to experience pleasure. What is pleasure? I listen to a piece of music. The piece of music was to my liking. It has to do with matchunas hanefesh. The experience of listening to that piece of music raises me up to the place in my neshama where everything is. That's what pleasure feels like. Pleasure is an infinite experience. Pleasure is you experiencing the pshitus and the believable of your neshama. How do you get pleasure? From things. You eat food, you get pleasure. You wear nice clothes, you get pleasure. You listen to music, you get pleasure. You learn chassidus, lyhadus, you get pleasure. You learn Gemara, you get pleasure. Now, not everybody gets pleasure from the same things, but those things that give you pleasure, what's happening is you're doing something in the world, you're satisfying a lack. I have a brain, I decided to use it today. And if I use my brain, I filled my brain with knowledge, I sharpened my mind, I focused my mind, I didn't let it be heavy and leather, I refined it, I made it edeler by using it. The consequence of satisfying that lack is an experience of pleasure. So there's two things here. What do I have? I have an idea. What did I get from that idea? The pleasure. Tomorrow, the idea is going to remain. The pleasure is going to be gone. It's very hard to get that pleasure back. The music you heard, you'll remember. The pleasure that came along, listen to music, love that for you, you're going to remember. But when you satisfied whatever chesaron you have on any level of the neshama, you experience pleasure. So the Hebrew word that you want to use here is harkava, a grafting of two things. And the word harkava is the word reichev. There's infinity riding on finitude. There's believable riding on gvul. Your neshama is believable. Your guf, your koiches, your levushim are gvul. And there's chalkos. You use one part of your nefesh to learn one idea. Riding on that one idea came the pshitas of your nefesh. Tainug is the way the neshama feels as everything is included in the nefesh, is riding on the idea that you understand. That's why pleasure feels so good. That's why people like to have pleasure. Because what pleasure does to a person, it makes you feel rich. When you experience pleasure, you feel good. Now what happens if your life is terrible? You keep pursuing pleasure because you want to go away from a terrible life towards a pleasureful life. That's why it can be so destructive. You understand the logic? In other words, the psychology of addiction is, what they call in the culture, you're medicating yourself. I feel terrible. How do I make myself feel good? I take a drug. But the minute the drug wears off, I feel terrible again. So I take the drug again. When does it doesn't finish. Why doesn't it finish? Because the pleasure isn't real. Because in this world you're lacking. And in order to live in this world, you can't define your life by getting pleasure. You can define yourself by learning ideas. You can define yourself by getting a job. You define yourself by making yourself into a mensch. Does it bring you pleasure? Sure. But the pleasure is not sustainable. The pleasure is you experiencing the bligvul of your nefesh as it's riding on the gavul of the satisfaction of one chesaron or another in the lower level of the neshama, the koiches level of the neshama. Do you understand what I'm saying? You get the basic idea? This is why Tainug is a mashal for bligvul. Tainug is a mashal for bligvul because the experience of Tainug is going to the place in your neshama where you have everything. That's why it feels good. The person has a terrible life. Even a piece of cake, for a few seconds, takes them away from that pain, puts them in a place of pleasure, because you went up to the place in the nefesh where you're not missing anything. The problem is it's not real. It's a dimyan. It's the way the Eibishter made the system. One of the bridges between the bligvul of the nefesh and the gvul of the nefesh, it's called harkava, is a lot of things that you'll do will give you pleasure. What is the rule? The kinds of things that in your nefesh are written as your personality, the way they come into the world is two people listen to music, and one guy says this is boring, the other one says it's delicious. What's the difference between these two people? I'm sure there can be more than one difference, but ideally the difference is one person's personality is disposed towards this music. So music is limited. But this music is connected to his neshama. So this music brings with it the pshitas of the nefesh. The other guy's nefesh has a different tendency. So this music doesn't speak to his neshama, it doesn't give him any pleasure, so he finds it unsatisfying. You follow what I'm saying? Yeah? So people get pleasure from different things. The constant rule about pleasure is, it's a mashal for bli gvul, but it's not a mashal for bli gvul that's real. It's a mashal for bli gvul that's fleeting. So now, this is point one. Point one. Okay, now goes point two. You cannot compare the pleasure from eating food or listening to music or wearing nice clothes, or driving a nice car, to the pleasure from enjoying the arts, the chushim. Looking at beautiful pictures or listening to beautiful music, it's a much higher pleasure. It's a much higher pleasure, right? Right. Now, you cannot compare the pleasure from the chushim. That's how it is in Kuntas of Mind. Some people would argue with the Kuntas of Mind, but the way that Rebbe Rashab lays it out, physical pleasures, food, clothing.
I'm saying the two categories you just mentioned.
Versus chushim, the arts.
Chushim
versus food, clothing, food.
Food is chush, tam, no?
Okay, maybe. But it's okay. Fine. It's a lower. So I guess I would have to say you can't compare the pleasure from the chusha and shmiyah for the chusha tam and mish. But maybe. Okay, Zolzain. Perhaps. Okay. Yeah. Fine. Zolzain. Yeah. You cannot compare the pleasure you get from enjoying beautiful music and looking at beautiful art to the pleasure from engaging in human emotions.
Working higher.
Much higher, right? Api Chassidus, it's higher. The Rebbe Rashab lists in the first Maimon of Kuntas Magin layers of Tainug, and the Tainug of Midas is higher than the Tainug of Chush. In other words, an understanding of psychology, understanding of human nature, understanding of politics, of what makes one person move like this, one person move like this. The pleasure of understanding the heart of man is a higher pleasure than appreciating the senses that the Eibishter gave us. Now, the pleasure from an idea, is an even higher pleasure than the pleasure from human emotion. And there's all kinds of ideas. There's ideas that are called mechanical ideas, ideas that help you build blocks, pile on top of the other. And then ideas go higher and higher and higher and higher and higher, right? Mechanical ideas, you have in Samachei 4 madreges in seichel. There's the mechanical seichel. I forgot what the second one is, but the third one is the ability to put together words, and the fourth is understanding ideas in Higoyin, abstract ideas. But let's go up. There's a difference between understanding Chochmas Chitzenius and understanding Torah. There's a difference between understanding Torah and understanding Pnimis HaTorah. So, the language we want to use is as follows. Every pleasure is a harkava. It's a combination of what triggers the Tainuk plus the Tainuk. And you cannot compare the Tainuk when the Markiv is food to a Tainuk when the Markiv is a visual arts. You cannot compare the Tainuk from understanding human emotions to the Tainuk of the visual arts. You can't compare the Tainuk from understanding physical ideas to understanding Elokus. The finer the Markiv, the deeper the pleasure. The lower the Markiv, the more pronounced the pleasure is. You follow what I'm saying? When I give this class, I used to give the mashal of people who eat very, very fine food. Very fine food, Edela food, yeah? They barely season their food. Why? They can afford to buy rich food, expensive food. And expensive food has a natural taste. You put almost nothing on it because you want to taste the food. Poor people's food is full of grease. Poor people's food is full of ketchup. Why? Because it's not tasty. So the taste is much more gross. In other words, when something is lower, it's louder, but it's less. When something is higher and finer, it's quieter, but it's more. So the juxtaposition, the arkava, the coupling, the bringing together of two things. The thing that's triggering the pleasure and the pleasure which is being triggered by it. The lower the thing triggering the pleasure, the further away from the pleasure it's going to be, and the louder or more superficial that pleasure is going to be. The higher the trigger, the higher the malkiv, what the pleasure is, the quieter and the deeper the pleasure is going to be. Does that sound right? Yeah. In fact, in the Fidikim Maimon I once saw that the Rebbe Rayat says all pleasure from midas and downward are not even called tainik; they're called nachas ruach. Chochma is seichel is tainuk, midas and chushim and lower than chushim is called nachas ruach. Now translate the word nachas ruach. You know Hebrew. Nachas ruach means the spirit that comes down. In other words, all pleasures from midas and downward is the pshitas of the believer, the nefesh coming down to meet the what it's riding on. Seichel is oinek. That when you learn an idea and you understand it, it raises you. That's the true concept of tainug. It lifts you up. You with me? You with me? Now, what is the ultimate mashal for this? The ultimate mashal for this, that it says, Mamar Chassidus, and you know this, Beklalos Pnimius Abba Pnimius Atik. Ideas, Chochma, is so close to tainug, is so close to the nefesh. There's a place where they bridge. And when you understand ideas are mugdal. When you get pleasure from an idea, the pleasure is separate from the idea. The pleasure is not a part of the idea. Or as I put it to you before, tomorrow you're going to come back, you can relearn the idea, the pleasure is not going to be there. The finest and the highest and the edelst ideas are so close to the pleasure that they're eliciting, that the end of the idea is the pleasure itself. Or to say what I'm saying in different words, when you have pleasure from food, the pleasure is a lie. It feels good, but it's not real. When you have a pleasure from a concept in seichel, that pleasure helps you understand. It's much closer to the seichel, and therefore it's less of a drug. It's less fake. It's less separate from what the pleasure, from the thing that is eliciting and triggering the pleasure. You follow what I'm saying? You follow what I'm saying? We're good so far, Menachem Mendel?
You said the last thing.
That a lower pleasure is a pleasure from a lower thing. The murkav and the markiv are further away, so the tainug is going to be much more pronounced, much louder, much more gilui, and much less true. If you eat food and get pleasure, what does that pleasure give you? Nothing. If you learn an idea and you get pleasure, that pleasure actually contributes to your understanding. And on the highest levels of understanding, the pleasure is the end of the understanding. Because there's a place where the end of the koiches and the beginning of the gili of the nefesh is in chokhmah. The finest ideas of chokhmah lose their oisius, which makes them ois koyach. And they gain an oil, which makes them nefesh. And there's a place where seichel and nefesh, where the gvul of the neshama, which is called chokhmah, and the believable of the neshama, which is called tainug, cross over to such an extent that you don't know where one ends and the next one begins. And such a tainug is very real. Because not just I learned the maim and I understood it and I got pleasure from it. I learned the maim and understood it, and the pleasure was more understanding. You with me? You follow? Yeah? Now, appreciate this. Any kind of pleasure is gilui nefesh. Any kind of pleasure is gilui nefesh. If any kind of pleasure is gilui nefesh, any kind of pleasure is beli gavul. Eating food and getting pleasure, that's infinity. Putting on a new pair of shoes and enjoying them and experiencing pleasure is gilui nefesh, so it's beli gavul. Listening to music and getting pleasure, that pleasure is a gilui nefesh, it's beli gavul. Understanding human nature and the level of midas and getting pleasure from it, that pleasure is an expression of the nefesh, so it's beli gavul. Learning an idea of chokhmas chitonius and understanding it well and getting pleasure, that pleasure is a gilui nefesh, it's beli gavul. Studying lahadus elf afavdos pnimis hatera, and from your learning getting pleasure is also gilui beli gavul. You following? So you have a bunch of beli gavuls, but they're not the same at all because of the harkava, because of what the beli gavul is connected with. If the beli gavul is connected to something finer and higher, it's more pshitos and less metzias. If the beli gavul is connected to something lower and coarser, it's much less pshitos and much more metzias. Although in every case, the tainug half of the equation is beli gavul. You can't compare this pleasure to this pleasure to this pleasure to this pleasure. They're all a mashal for experiencing your pshitos hanefesh. But on the lowest levels, it's not real. Only on the very highest levels does the tainug actually serve a purpose, because it culminates your understanding of ideas. But in every case, it's a mashal for beli gavul. Well, that's the explanation.
So is the tainug of taste any different than the tainug of shmiya in that regard, because they both don't help you?
Okay, that's a question which is not for right now. And I think it depends on how much of a musician you are. It depends how much a chush you have. But a person whose involvement in music is rudimentary and what's the word? Not your whole mahus, they're probably not much different. A real musician, his neshama is music. So the tainug of the music contributes to the music. I told you the Maisa where a guy told the Rebbe Rashab that if I don't have a live audience, I can't reach this note. He couldn't sing a certain trop because it was such a high note without an audience. The people gave him koiches. That's, another neshama enhancing his own neshama. It's a fantastic idea. So if you want to understand how you can have madregas and believable, this is the explanation. The mashal for Ein Seif is Tainuk. But Ein Seif has a concept called Gilui. Any time you attach to Ein Seif the word Gilui, you're attaching to Ein Seif the word Arkova. There's something other in the Ein Seif. Now the chiddush of the Ayam Beis is that the something other is not outside of the Ein Seif. It's the way the Eibishter made the Ein Seif. Hashem made the Ein Seif to have Chochmah. Hashem made the Ein Seif to have Chesed. So the Chochmah, the Ein Seif, and the Ein Seif are not the Harkava in the sense that the Chochmah is covering over the Ein Seif, but they are a Harkava in the sense that the Chochmah makes the Ein Seif in a state of Gilui. If the Ein Seif in a state of Gilui, automatically it's less Ein Seif. In Atzilus is Gilui Ein Seif. In Kesed is Gilui Ein Seif. In Akudin is Gilui Ein Seif. In At is Gilui Ein Seif. In Lifin is Gilui Ein Seif. They're all the same, but they're all not the same. They're all the same because they're Gilui Ein Seif. They're all not the same because one is more Gilui and one is less Gilui. What does more Gilui mean? That the relationship between the Ein Seif and the other aspect, even if the other aspect is not a Zulas, it's not a Makabel, it's the aspect in the Ein Seif that makes the Ein Seif have some kind of arkava that makes Ein Seif more revealed or less revealed. The Ein Seif is always believable because the Ein Seif is always pshitos. In other words, Ein Seif of Chochmah is two things. Chochmah is a koyach. Ein Seif is a gilui. There is a place where the Chochmah, the koyach part, and the Eineg, the gilui part, never became separate. No, but it's not first I understand and then I get pleasure. I'm talking about the levels of the neshama where there's still pleasure, but in that pleasure there's chokhmah. The fact that in that oineg there's chokhmah makes the oineg less. The fact that in Ein Seif there's spheres makes, that's why the Rebbe Rashab doesn't want to call as a spheres and ed bli gvul. Even though the spheres is not in addition to the in the ayin base, Ein Seif a bli gvul always means Seif of Kalam. Always. When you're talking about the sheet of Eretz Mitzvah as a spheres and ed, he doesn't want to call bli gvul. He doesn't want to call gvul either. He wants to call tzir. Why? Because any time the Ein Seif is connected to something which is not Ein Seif, the Ein Seif is qualified by that other thing. The pleasure isn't pure. You understand? That's why when you learn Chassidus, in the Samach Vov, for example, you talk about Shabbos, which you have but you have in the very end of Samach Vov, you have it, and the second chelik of Ayin Beis, you have a big harichas in the Mamorim of the summer of Ayin Hey, where he talks about Shabbos. There's the pleasure of Friday night, there's the pleasure of Shabbos day, there's the pleasure of Shabbos Shalashudis, Raiva Deraiv. And the Rebbe, what's between this pleasure and this pleasure and this pleasure? It's Einik Shabbos. I go away from the world, experience Einik. I go away from my work, experience Ein Seif, I experience Bli Gvul. But Friday night is pleasure from work. So the pleasure is more pronounced, it's lower. What's Shabbos day? To put it technically, it's the pleasure from the pleasure of work. Since Friday night I stopped working, and I had the pleasure, Shvisa Malacha. Now I have the pleasure from getting pleasure from Shvisa Malacha. And the way Chassidus wants to explain it is that the second pleasure of Shabbos is a lot closer to what we call in our culture Einig HaPoshet. Einig HaPoshet means pleasure that's not connected to a thing. Pleasure which is not connected to a thing has no gilui. If it has no gilui, it has no experience. Pleasure is your Bli Gvul. Your ability to experience your Bli Gvul is because the pleasure is riding on something which is not Bli Gvul. That's what Hakava means. The Ein Seif is murkav, it's a reichiv on a tzir, on a gvul. Could be on food, could be in Yedias Hashem, and a lot of other stuff in between. But because there's a hakava of oineg and tzir or gvul or shtusim v'avolim, the oineg is less because it's more revealed. More is less. But there's the oineg hapashat. What does oineg hapashat mean? The experience of your neshama by itself. Well, oineg hapashat is called bilti murgash. Why? What makes you feel it? You didn't eat any cake. You didn't drink any soda. Yeah? You didn't study the psychology of the person sitting across the room. You didn't learn an idea. Oineg hapashat is bilti murgash. And then Raiva de Raivin, Shalshudis is good on Inyan Atzmi. Chassidus talks about experiencing the pleasure of your neshama or the pleasure of Ein Seif, which has no harkava. How do you get to that? How do you get to something that has no ladder? It's a great question, and whatever the answer is, but this is how Chassidus explains Shabbos. So Oineg becomes the workable mashal to understand how A, you could have Ein Seif, and B, you could have Madregas. A, you could have Ein Seif, and B, you could have Gili and Helen. So here the Rebbe Rashab is telling us, Leif now it seems Asvidus exists, but they're not in a state of Gili. They're in a state of Pshitas, because they're in a state of believable. Tzimtzum Erishin happens. After the Tzimtzum Erishin, number one, they're in a state of Gili. Number two, because they're in a state of individuation, not just state of Gili, they come out one at a time. Not only they're in a state of Gili, they're in a state of Gili which is not Pshitas. And because they're in a state of Gili which is not Pshitas, they're also in a state of Gili where the Pnimius went away. What's the Pnimius? What's the Pnimius? And you're right, it's the Pnimius of the Chitanis. You're 100% right. You're really right. The Pnimius is when all Asesfiras exist together, they don't exist by Mitzias. If they don't exist by Mitzias, automatically the Ein Seif, which is connected to them, is a quieter and a deeper one. When you separate them, when you bring them out, and in Avodas Adam, when you learn a particular idea, so the pleasure is relative. The Ein Seif is his galus on its markiv, on its chariot, on what it's riding on. So now, did I explain everything written? I didn't, because I don't understand. But a parveter, it's a little havana. The very fact that there's a tzimtzum Arish and the Ein Seif is begilui is a big shinui. Where's the gili coming from? The gili is coming from the Sfiras. The Sfiras are, right, Asses Sfiras of Ein Seif. That's two things together. Asses Sfiras and Ein Seif. The chiddush of the Ayin Beis is that the Asses Sfiras were not added to the Ein Seif and changed the Ein Seif. They're the character of the Ein Seif from the beginning. Pnimi b'yetzer, right? Because of the kavanah. But the Rebbe Rashab is very careful never to call them bli gvul. Even though they are bli, Ein Seif is bli gvul. But Ein Seif is bli gvul with a character. And Seif bli gvul with an entity which is causing the Ein Seif to be in a state of gili. Lif ne'at tzimtzum, all as the Sfiras are gonus. Together, the Ein Seif's need for Gilui to be connected to the Sfiras is less. When they go through Tzimtzum Erishin, and they come after Tzimtzum Erishin, the fact that they become a Gilui makes the relationship between the Ein Seif aspect of the Sfiras and the Sfiras aspect of the Sfiras a little bit further away. You have more Gilui. If they come out one at a time, you're losing a whole Eichos of it called Pnimius. You're right. It's the Ein Seif of Sfiras. It's not like in Samavov. It's the Ein Seif of Sfiras. But when Sfiras are together, they're b'meila more bottle. They're less mitzias. So the Roichev is a Eidel Roichev because the Markiv is less of a mitzias. La'achar HaTzimtzum, the Markiv becomes more of a mitzias, so the Roichev becomes more of a Gilui. And there's a criteria where you lose the Pnimius and you have only the Chitzedias. Now, what's the mashal? What's the mashal? The mashal is if on Shabbos morning you lose the oinig of Shabbos morning and you're only left with the oinig of Friday night. That's the mashal. Instead of going up on Shabbos, you go down on Shabbos. There's the mashal Shabbos morning, where you're above the oinig that's going away from Allah. Yeah. If you take away the higher oinig, you still have oinig, but it's a lower oinig. It's a lower oinig. It's connected more to the mitzias. In other words, there's two approaches to this tainug. There's the way we experience the tainug, and there's the truth of the experience of tainug. The way we experience of tainug is we go from the thing that gives us pleasure to the pleasure. We go from milui chesaron, from satisfying a lack, to getting pleasure. We go first the thing, then the pleasure from the thing. But in the nefesh, just the way around. The first thing that exists in your nefesh is that the nefesh is believable. The believable, the nefesh is pleasure. What does pleasure mean? A richness. I have everything, but it exists in a very, very abstract way. As the nefesh is his galus, that pleasure comes down. Now what causes pleasure to come down? It takes on character. That character is a hadkova. In the Samach Vav, that character comes from someplace else. It's called Kalim. And the Ayin Beis, that character is built into the Ayah. But whether the Kalim are creating the Gilui of the Tainug, or the Esesfiris and Ayah creating the Gilui of the Tainug, the more the Esesfiris emerge, the more the Tainug is revealed, the more the Tainug is revealed, the less the Tainug is. And he's dividing the less the tainug is into two concepts. Concept number one is less tainug. And concept number two, that you're losing a layer of tainug. You're losing the pnimius. So it's not just less, it's the whole eichos of oineg that could be when all the esesphiras exist together in a state of pshitos and a state of gniz is lost. I think it's enough. Huh?